Alright, so today I'm going to show you on the Scoop Back Leo the best way to pin these curves that you got on the front and the back. First and foremost, the easiest way to work with a curve on sewing is just to pretend it's straight. So I've started pinning all the way up to here, my right side to my right side, and I am going to pin the rest of it. And how I do is I just kind of take section by section and work it out. The best thing, cutting happens, patterns slip. So stretch fabrics, you can kind of just stretch it to work if you've had some cutting issues. So I'm just going to finish pinning, and I always recommend basting at least on your sewing machine first before you try to do this on your serger. That way you can fix any issues without having lost any fabric. And especially where this is a mesh fabric, it's terrible to unpick. So you can see I'm right about here, and I have just slight need to stretch, so I'm just gonna stretch it out and give one more pin. And now you're ready to sew. With this many pins, I'm not gonna leave, I'm gonna pull my machine forward, but I'm not gonna leave my pins in. So I want my pin cushion out and ready. And the curve is pretty easy on the back. You'll see I've got my notch lined up here. And I actually forgot my notch in the black, but I know it belongs right at the top edge there. And I'm gonna use a contrasting thread for your benefit, and it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance on these, so it's pretty narrow. You just got to watch it here. And I'm just going to keep going. I didn't backstitch because I do plan to go over it with my serger, but you just want to keep that 1/4 inch line up there. You can see back here my white, it's just going on. I did go over some pins, and you just kind of pull and straighten it. As you can see, as it's going in, it's coming in at a curve and it's leaving at a curve. So I'm not sewing it straight, but as I get to that needle point, I am pulling it tight so I don't get any extra. So you want to have the fabric almost laying flat so it's still in shape. But as it comes to the needle, there's no extra bunching. And just try to keep it lined up. So, and I use this edge of my presser foot here to tell me that that's my 1/4 inch mark. But you need to check your own machines to make sure your presser foot really does line up to a 1/4 inch. You can see right over here I've got all this bunching. I'm just making sure that none of that bunching is underneath my needle. And these pins really help keep it right where it needs to be, and I'm not shifting too much. That's one hazard with stretch, is that you can end up stretching it so much on the top layer fabric especially that it doesn't match up with the bottom, which is why a lot of people will use a walking foot to sew these stretch fabrics. We're almost done, and I'm just keep checking there, make sure I'm not sewing any bulk in there, that I've just got these 2 layers, because again, unpicking this mesh is terrible. In fact, I probably would just cut it off and make it a smaller size. That's how I would work. But I also have the luxury of being a fabric hoarder, so I tend to have extra fabric. It's one of those things when people want fabric requirements, don't they just always buy extra? Because that's what I do. Ask my husband. You could probably just heard him laugh as he recorded this. So I'm stretching here at the very end, this purple top only, because I'm just a little short on my cutting, probably pinned off a little bit. I'm going to keep my notch out there just about right. And then I am going to backstitch right here just because I stretched it a little bit. And there I have gotten my stitching. And you can see, now it's all bunched and curved, but you can see that white line. That was it. And now I can open it up and you can see this beautiful back. I mean, it's adorable. So, and we're going to obviously, when you get to the next step on that where it talks about top stitching, you're going to top stitch that seam down so you don't see it up here, and you just top stitch right along there. I'm not going to show that in this video because I do want to serge this. So, but, oh, I love it. So let's go on to the front. A little bit more tricky, but I've already got it pinned. So on this, I did the same kind of technique where I just stretched it out straight and pinned in sections. And I start pinning, I always start pinning with the center mark. And so I mark at my point with the little divot here in the back. And it kind of comes up a little bit. And so I'm just going to pull it back down. And one way to help is snip it just a tiny bit. And that way you can move it in two separate lines almost. And you don't want to snip it much. I'd say like 1/8 of an inch. You make sure it's snipped all the way through on the back here at that point. So, I mean, it's just teeniest snip. And then I'm going to go back to my sewing machine and I'm going to start at one end. And clearly the starting position is the easiest. And here on the girls Leo, you'll notice that this purple is very narrow here. It's that way it keeps it modest up on the sides where you have such a low scoop in the back. We wanted to make sure we had good side coverage because there's chances that it could be sheer in that back part. So I'm going to back stitch. Be careful when you work on a mesh for that back stitch that it doesn't get caught under the machine. And this is where really important where you watch that 1/4 inch seam allowance because you still need to have some upper part for your machine to grab onto with the elastic and not, or the sleeve. So we're going to keep going along here. Pull out some of these pins as we get to them. And I'm just going to keep pulling that up. Because it's curving, it's going to naturally pull it down. Alright, so we're going to keep going. Keeping my edge there and trying not to let my fabric slip too far down off that black line. So I'm almost to my center point here, and I'm going to just keep pretending like it is a straight line and pulling it straight. So once I get there, I am going to stop and put my needle in the down position. I can see where my snip is down here, and I am going to put my needle in the down position right there. So I better take this needle out because that's about center. And I just make sure it's down. Then I make sure my pins are out in the back because nothing worse than grabbing a pin. And now I'm going to lift that back up, and now we're on a second line. And that's going to help get a nice sharp point in the front too. So I'm going to push that back down and start back up and finish. I don't want it to grab. You can see there that I've got some in the back, so I'm going to pull it out from underneath my presser foot. And there is definitely, I mean, each time you do this, you're going to get a little bit better at maneuvering around that neckline. I think I still have room for improvement. A lot of room for improvement. You'll notice at the very end right here, there's a little teeny bit that hangs off, and that's completely normal. So you need to worry about, because that's just going to come sucked up in the seam allowance, and you won't even notice it. That just helps you have something to grab onto too. But to help keep the same line for the arm, say there. And the back stitch. And now I have got my front done. I'll see, look at my nice sharp point there. And again, I'm going to be serging here, but at the end you will top stitch this down and you'll be ready to go.